a few more seconds. Okay, now we start. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to today's Candidates Forum. It features 3 candidates for Santa Clara County Superior Court, Seat 5. My name is Eileen Kao, the current president of League of Women Voters of Southwest Santa Clara Valley, which covers Campbell, Los Gatos, Monte Sereno, and Saratoga. The 3 candidates for running for the Santa Clara County Superior Court, Seat 5, are in alphabetical order: Jay Boyarsky, Nicole M. Ford, Johnny Linda Stebbin. Thanks to our voter service team members, Eleanor Eek, Sophia Gao, Katie Zolan, Tom Pigrods, Ann Revel, Francis, and myself. We put together this forum for tonight. Next. Now let me just share with you a little bit of the history of the League of Women Voters. It started in about 104 years ago by a group of women who fought to get voting rights for women and succeeded. Today, voting rights are for all US citizens who register to vote. And please remember, it's very important to know that the League is a nonpartisan political organization for men and women. And we never support or oppose any political party or any candidate. We work in 2 roles: voter service and action. Voter service include programs of candidates forum, like tonight, and then we do pros and cons on ballot measures, such as Proposition 1. Later on this year, we will do a presentation for the pros and cons. And we do voter registration. We support the voter 411 org for this one-stop shopping that you can have all of your questions about voting. So now I would like to turn the program over to Katie Zolan, who is president of League of Women Voters of Los Altos Mountain View League, and the moderator for tonight's forum. So Katie, please.
Thank you, Aileen. Good evening to everyone. Before we get started, I want to highlight a few facts about the upcoming primary. Ballots are already in the mail. I received mine today. Hopefully you have already received them, or we'll be getting it shortly. Early voting sites will open beginning on February 24th, and the ballot drop-off boxes have already been set up. If you want to track your ballot, you can go to the Santa Clara County Registrar of Voters websites, or the 2 websites that are listed right here on this slide. One important reminder, now that most of us vote by mail, it's extremely important to check how your name is spelled. So take a look at that on your ballot to make sure that when you sign it on the exterior of your envelope, that it matches the name that you use. And as you probably know, next slide, please. You can return your ballot in 3 different ways. Via the US mail, must be postmarked by Election Day and received within 3 days. So send it in early, don't wait till the last minute. An official drop box, or by going to a vote center. And the voter information guide that you received from the county has the addresses for the drop boxes and vote centers in case you have questions. Next slide. Our candidates tonight are campaigning for seat number 5 on the Santa Clara County Superior Court. This slide has a lot of information, tells you a little bit about the job of Superior Court judge. You know, there's over 2,000 judges, Superior Court judges throughout California. Whoever is elected for this seat will serve on the Superior Court, and judges typically handle both criminal and civil cases. The judge can oversee trials, make rulings on evidence, instruct juries, make findings of fact and conclusions of law. And one important distinction in this election is that unlike candidates for political offices, such as the Board of Supervisors or Senate and so on, judicial candidates are required to follow a code of judicial ethics during their campaigns. As a result, the candidates will not be asked questions about their views on particular issues or how they might rule on an issue that may come before them. So, for example, we are not going to be asking and cannot ask a judicial candidate about, for example, how would you rule on a case about, gun rights or abortion or things like that? Judicial candidates are not allowed to answer questions like that. Now, let's go to introducing our candidates. When I say their name, they will put their camera on so they can be seen, and I'll be introducing them in alphabetical order. First, Jay Boyarsky. Or is he there? I don't see him.
Good evening.
Okay, there you go. Sorry, you didn't appear on my screen. Next, Nicole M. Ford. Thank you. And then Janine Linda Stebbins.
Good evening.
Thank you. And our timer tonight is Tom Pickrow. Good evening. Thank you all, and thank you for your participation. Now, the league follows a very defined format in its forums. Before we begin, I want to highlight some of the ground rules that the candidates have agreed to observe during the forum. The league supports the accepted norms of civil discourse, and in that light, the candidates have agreed to follow the norms that were outlined in a document that they received. For example, candidates have agreed not to interrupt one another, and they've agreed to follow the allotted amount of time for each question. They've also agreed to refrain from naming or making personal statements about another candidate. This forum is scheduled to last approximately 1 hour, and each candidate will make a 90-second opening statement responding to a question that they received in advance. Next, the candidates will respond to questions in a randomized order. Question sorters, who are league members, have reviewed the questions submitted through the registration process and from other sources, grouped questions by subject, and then have selected the questions that will be asked. Each candidate will have 60 seconds to respond to the questions unless the moderator says differently. Finally, the candidates will have 90 seconds to make a closing statement, again, answering a question that was given to them in advance. And to help us keep on time, we have our timekeeper, Tom Pickrow, who I introduced you, who will signal to each candidate when their time is up, including giving them a warning at 30 seconds and when to stop. All right, so now we will begin. So the candidates, as you know, were introduced in alphabetical order, and that's the order that will be followed in responding to the first question, and each candidate will have 90 minutes to respond. The first question is, why are you qualified to be elected to serve as a Santa Clara Superior Court judge? Mr. Boyarsky, would you be the first to answer this question?
Thank you, Ms. Zoglin. My father, Abraham, landed at Utah Beach 3 days after turning 19, 4 days after D-Day, in 1944. He fought for our country, and shortly before he turned 20, he was among the group of U.S. soldiers that helped liberate the Dachau concentration camp. My dad is about to turn 99. He and his generation gave so much to this country, and I asked myself, what are you doing to repay this debt of those that went before you? And for me, the answer has been public service, and I hope to continue doing that in the role of Superior Court judge. I am uniquely qualified to serve as a Superior Court judge because of my experience and my empathy. I have served the law and the community for over 30 years. My experience is not only long, but broad. I served as a federal law clerk here in San Jose to Judge William Ingram, my mentor. I worked at a prestigious San Francisco law firm after I graduated from UC Berkeley School of Law. I took a huge pay cut, and it was the best decision I ever made in my life to join the DA's office. After nearly 30 years in the DA's office, I'm now the chief assistant DA, the number 2 person. Like judges, I make decisions every day that affect people's lives, showing empathy and hopefully some wisdom. And I've been successful in that role. I
Thank
believe
you.
I'm the most qualified candidate because of my experience and my
Thank
empathy.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Your time's up. Ms. Ford, same question for you.
Thank you so much. I think I'm also qualified here. I spent my undergrad years and my years at law school interning with the district attorney's office. I had made a decision when I was a young child that I wanted to be an attorney who could serve people and not make them have to pay, having been through the family law system as a child. My last year of law school, I started working directly with those survivors of crime, specifically survivors of domestic violence, human trafficking, and sexual assault. And that began a nearly now 20-year career serving primarily that population. I went and did nonprofit for almost 10 years and served in legal aid doing family law, civil law, doing restraining orders. I did immigration law. So I have experience in almost all fields. And when I went into private practice, I maintained my commitment to pro bono service and to serving the larger community. I'm a Spanish-speaking bilingual attorney. I donate my time to minors counsel, which means often making difficult decisions, dealing with people who are frustrated and wrought with trauma. And based on that experience, I believe I can bring a very different perspective to the bench and serve all people.
Thank you. Ms. Stebbins, what qualifies you to be elected as a Superior Court judge?
Great, thanks. Well, first and foremost, I think growing up here in Santa Clara County is part of my experience and background. I grew up in Milpitas. I now live in Almaden. I went to school in downtown San Jose at Notre Dame, and then on to UC Berkeley and UC Davis. I've been a deputy district attorney for 26 years. And what's more unique about that is that I've spent all 26 years in the courtroom, both doing civil law is what I do now in environmental, and doing criminal law, which has been the primary focus. But again, I've been in civil law as well. I don't supervise, I do. I'm in the courtroom day to day, handling cases, sometimes caseloads of over 100 with victims and witnesses, and making sure that justice is doled out fairly, equitably, and hopefully quickly as well. Many of my current cases, like I said, go into environmental. That takes me into the civil realm against big companies like Kelly Moore, Pick and Pull, Granite Rock. Clearly, I have a huge criminal background in sexual assaults, domestic violence. I'm excited for Judge Chiarello, who is retiring from seat 5, and he is endorsing me to replace him in that seat. And I would enjoy continuing my public service as a judge.
Thank you. Our next question is, and everyone has 60 seconds for the remaining questions until the end as a reminder. Next question is, describe your experience in courtrooms. I know you all have touched on this, but if you could describe your experience in courtrooms, including the types of cases you have handled. Ms. Ford, would you be the first one to answer the question?
Thank you. Doing domestic violence primarily means that I am in court every day. An example would be in the month of January, I had at least 2 trials. One was a 3-day trial. So I am in court all the time. I have to do sometimes 2-week trials, sometimes a trial on the fly. But I have an extensive, almost 20-year career doing in-person court every day, all the time. Long cause hearings, short cause hearings, long trials, knowing family law, code of civil procedure, evidence, criminal law, business, and all of that have played a large role in practicing where I practice right now. And so having to be very familiar with all aspects of different codes, I think has just really improved me as a lawyer and my experience there.
Thank you. Ms. Stebbins.
Okay, so my criminal law background is 26 years in the courtroom. I've done juvenile law, sexual assault, internet crimes against children, domestic violence, rapes, homicides. Right now, I do environmental prosecution, which takes me everywhere from fish and wildlife cases in protecting the environment and species and habitats, all the way to major pollutants of our stormwaters. I also did consumer and environmental takes me into both criminal and into civil. And that's a decision and a discretion I have as a DA as to how to prosecute those. And then also I did consumer protection. Those types of cases were protecting consumers against unlicensed contractors, unlicensed immigration lawyers, unlicensed physicians, and all of that in protecting those victims. So I have a breadth of civil experience and criminal experience and the nuances of the laws that apply to each of those.
Thank you. Mr. Boyarsky, would you describe your experience in courtrooms, including the types of cases you have handled?
Yes, my first experience, as I mentioned, was as a federal law clerk for Judge William Ingram in San Jose, where I literally learned by his example what it means to be a judge. And so I did that for about a year and a half as a law clerk. I then started in the DA's office, and I've tried many cases. I've handled thousands of hearings. That was the first 17 years of my career. I have an expertise in hate crime prosecution as well as sexual assault prosecution. I worked at a law firm for a short period of time doing civil litigation. But I also want to say that my courtroom experience isn't limited to being a lawyer. I've also been in court as a litigant. I went to probate court to help my son change his gender and his name. I know what it means to not just appear in court as a lawyer, but to use the court, and how the court system is so important to provide our citizens with their legal rights.
Thank you. Next question. How would you ensure that people of all backgrounds who come before you, if you are elected to be a judge, would you ensure that all people of all backgrounds who come before you are treated with respect and equality? Ms. Stebbins, would you start, please?
So I do a lot of teaching as part of my work in the justice system and my community service. I think the best way to ensure that everyone is treated fairly in court is you have to go back to the beginning of the process. So I spend a lot of time currently, and I would continue to do so, making sure that law enforcement is up to date on the laws so that the rights of individuals are protected from the very beginning in the process at every stage. I teach our new hires. I also teach other district attorneys. So I think that bringing those aspects into the courtroom, that knowledge ensures that everybody is treated fairly and justly. And also, as part of my 26 years in the courtroom, everybody, that you learn to listen and be reasonable and understand what the needs of each individual are. And those translate directly to being a judge.
Thank you. Mr. Boyarsky?
I think more importantly than what all of us would say about respecting people from diverse backgrounds is what we can show about how we've actually done that. And the thing that I'm most proud of in my 12 years as serving as the #2 to District Attorney Jeff Rosen is shaping the future of the district attorney's office through the hiring, which I've overseen. I've helped this by recruiting an extraordinarily diverse and talented group of prosecutors, more than 60% of the attorneys in the office. And that group of prosecutors is now more than 40% Black, Latino, Asian, members of the LGBTQ+ community, and is more than half female. those figures are roughly more than double what the numbers were 12 years ago. So I'm very, very proud of that. And the reason we're able to succeed in hiring and retention is because we're committed to respecting everybody. And I'll do that as a judge.
Thank you. Ms. Ford?
So my belief is that one of the first steps to accessing our justice system, whether it's in the criminal, civil, or family, is information and having knowledge and understanding the system. And far too often people don't, whether it's restriction because of disability or language access or financial resources. I have long been a part of numerous coalitions within the court and outside of the court, in the general community, in the 15 years I've been in this county, where we have worked on language access, including language access and language access lines with law enforcement. We've ensured that we have posters in multiple languages, that there's always an interpreter available in family court. And just getting the information out to people and understanding their rights and what they're entitled to as part of our access to our justice system, I think has been critical. And I do plan to continue that work if elected judge.
Thank you. Next question. What role can a judge play in making changes in our legal system in order to deal with access to justice or other injustices that may be confronted in the courtroom? Ms. Ford, would you start with this question, please?
Thank you. I think one of the first things you would see as a judge is where the lack of access is. And I know that the judges put on educational programs. They work closely with our bar to put on educational programs. They start reaching out to the local community organizations and nonprofits about how can we make this more accessible. And I know there are groups within the judicial system and within the judiciary that work on these projects. And then they also engage in education, whether it's educating other judges, educating our own bench, or engaging in education with our lawyers and other CBOs to just spread information and close those gaps. And I think that that is something that a judge will be uniquely positioned to do because they're going to see those gaps in their courtroom.
Thank you. Ms. Stebbins?
Thanks. Yeah, so there are certain programs that already I've engaged in as a DA that takes me into the courtroom with the community. I did law-related education with the 5th graders, bringing them to the courthouse. I think exposure, so sort of what, similar to what Ms. Ford said, access and exposure. You need the community to know that the justice system is there for them. That makes them feel more comfortable, treated more fairly, and have faith that the system is there for them. Also getting involved in the community, just like the cops do shop with a cop, our judges do get involved in the classrooms so that, again, the community sees judges as their friends, as an ally when they are in court or have to touch the justice system. And again, we can't change the laws, but keeping public safety as a foremost in the mind, because that is what is really important to the community right now. That's the way that we can shape as well when we're a judge.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Mr. Boyarsky?
Ms. Zoglin, can you repeat the question for me,
Sure.
please?
It was a long one, and I'll try to do that more often. What role can a judge play in making changes in our legal system in order to deal with access to justice or other injustices that may be confronted in the courtroom?
I really think the most important thing a judge can do is to see the people that appear before him or her, to hear the people that appear before him or her. It was June 2nd of 2016. I was in the courtroom supporting prosecutor Alalay Kianursi, prosecutor in my office who is supporting me. She prosecuted Brock Turner. And I saw Chanel, the victim, speak, read her letter. And I saw the way that that matter was dealt with, and it was very frustrating. I had a really small role in the Brock Turner prosecution, but one thing that I did, and it's a case that I think really helped change society for the better, is I was the one who said, let's publish that letter so that people can read what Chanel went through. And within 4 days, 16 million people had read that letter. And so what happened in court led to society changing and becoming a more fair place.
Thank you. Next question. Many in the community are not very familiar with the court system or judges. What would you most like the community to know about judges or the court system? Ms. Stebbins, let's start off with you on this question, please.
Sure. Again, I think that exposure and education is important. I think, for example, with when I've gone out to talk to people and they are concerned about the homeless population, I don't think the community realized that we had a drug court that was dealing with drug addicts, a whole infrastructure that went by the wayside after Prop 47 was passed. I think that more knowledge and education about what services we actually have in the justice system for the mentally ill. We're not just locking people up who have nonviolent mental illness or nonviolent drug offenses. We actually had a whole infrastructure, and we still have an infrastructure to deal with those. And jail might be the stick, but it's the stick to get folks into treatment and get them the help that they need. And I think more education on that so that people understand more what the courts are doing for them.
Thank you. Mr. Boyarsky, what would you most like the community to know about judges or the court system?
Well, I think two things. I think the first thing that I'd like the community to know about the role of the judge is that judges don't make the law. Some people think that judges make the law, but in fact, it's the role of the judge to strive to apply the law in a way that's fair and treats everyone with dignity and with respect. I think the second thing that I would want to communicate to the community about the judicial system is that it is massively under-resourced at this point in time. In Santa Clara County, the Superior Court is struggling to hire court reporters and clerks. Many judicial positions are unfilled. We are actually failing our community by not providing adequate funding for our courts. And everyone in the judicial system is overworked. And I think that if that's one thing I can leave the community after this evening, it's that they're aware that there frankly is a crisis going on in the judicial system in terms of underfunding.
Thank you. Ms. Ford, what would you most like the community to know about judges or the court system?
I think one of the things that I think is important to acknowledge is that this system is not perfect, and judges are human and they're also not perfect, and that there are flaws and gaps in the system, but we're working to fill those gaps, to right wrongs, to make it a more equitable and fair system, and that it's run by people, human beings who have families, human beings who have had struggles and traumas, and that we're not some superior being lording over the people who come into our court, that we are just like them, except with a law degree. And I think it's important that people understand that there's a humanity to this, and that we do understand when they're coming to us and they are frustrated or they're traumatized or they feel like the whole world's against them, that we understand that because maybe we've been there too. And I think humanizing the court helps people feel a little more comfortable in it.
Thank you. Next question. What judicial philosophy or approach would you use in the courtroom if you are elected to Superior Court? Mr. Boyarsky?
I don't have I don't have a judicial philosophy such as original intent or strict constructionism or progressivism. My judicial philosophy is embodied by judges like Judge Ingram, who I clerked for on the federal court. My judicial philosophy is to be kind, to show respect, to be as well prepared as you can be. I was talking to a lawyer named Tom Hogan. I asked him about Judge Ingram, and he said, I ran into him up in San Francisco, and he remembered my name and asked me who I was. And he said, it just made me so proud that I was a lawyer after that interaction with Judge Ingram. So my judicial philosophy is be prepared, work hard, and treat everyone with dignity and respect.
Thank you. Ms. Ford, what judicial philosophy or approach would you use in the courtroom?
I think it's holding people accountable while showing empathy and compassion. As I've often said in talking to people, people make mistakes. I don't think anyone's inherently bad. And a lot of times when some of those big mistakes come up, it's because there's been trauma, and it's important to recognize that. But at the same time, helping people own up to their mistakes, recognize the things that they've done and hold them accountable is the pathway to real change, to really forming a new path for that person in a positive way. I think holding people accountable is absolutely critical as part of that. Learned that a lot in family law. But I think there's a way to do it without bringing the hammer down and being unfeeling. As they say, it costs nothing to be kind.
Thank you. Ms. Stebbins, what judicial philosophy or approach would you use in the courtroom?
So again, judges, we don't make laws. So to have a specific philosophy laid out would be hard to say. But again, I agree with Ms. Ford. Public safety is paramount. That's part of the reason why we are there, is to ensure public safety. Accountability is paramount for individuals, need to be held accountable. And the community needs to have faith that that is happening. So that's part of it as well. And then though on the hand in hand with that goes, as a judge, oftentimes we would be seeing people on the worst day of their lives. And to have some empathy for that and some understanding. Sometimes you're going to be sentencing a person, sometimes you're going to be sentencing a crime, and sometimes you're going to be sentencing both. And you really need to have empathy and understanding as to what your goal is at that time and with that individual.
Thank you. Next question. How would conflicts of interest impact your decision-making as a judge? Ms. Stebbins, why don't you start off with this question?
Sure. So I think, or I know as a judge, it would be similar to a DA. It's transparency is utmost importance for people to have faith in the justice system, just like transparency in the DA's office is of the utmost importance. Folks need to believe that the justice system is fair and it's unbiased. So a conflict of interest, if it arose, would require me to step back out of that case. There can't be an appearance of a conflict of interest because that really breaks the foundation of the trust and faith that the community has in the justice system.
Thank you. Mr. Boyarsky, how would conflicts of interest impact your decision-making as a judge?
I would never be involved in any matter as a judge where I had a conflict of interest or where there was even an appearance of a conflict of interest. That's a really strong ethical rule that I'm sure all of us would adhere to. There are resources for judges, including new Superior Court judges. The California Judges Association, for example, has an ethics panel, an ethics hotline, so that whenever a question comes up, you turn to your colleagues or you actually can call other judges who have been faced with potential issues. So I take that extremely seriously, and I would take all steps to avoid any conflict of interest or even the appearance of a conflict of interest.
Thank you. Same question, Ms. Ford?
Thank you. I think my colleagues have expressed it pretty well, that when there is an overt conflict of interest, I think the only thing you can do is take yourself off that case. I think there's also a perceived conflict of interest, and I think you need to make sure that that perception is handled, because people need to believe in a system that in the last 4 to 10 years has suffered a lot of public scrutiny of, is it fair? Are there conflicts of interest? And does our judicial system mean anything? And so I think it's really important to take that in. But I also think it's important to recognize that sometimes it depends on the perceived conflict of interest. If it's because I'm a woman and I'm handling a family law case, am I going to favor the woman? And I think that those are important to kind of check yourself and utilize the resources that were mentioned by Mr. Boyarsky and Ms. Stebbins, and just make sure that you are listening to more experienced judges and the panels.
Thank you. Next question. What are the biggest challenges facing the Santa Clara County Superior Court? Mr. Boyarsky.
Well, I think we're allowed to give shorter answers. We don't need to use our full 60 seconds.
You never
And
need to
so
use the full amount.
then I think I'm going to just refer back to my earlier question about resources and the shortage of clerks, court reporters, unfilled positions. That is a huge challenge.
Thank you. Ms. Ford, what are the biggest challenges facing the Santa Clara County Superior Court?
Obviously, funding is a huge thing. We used to have I think 13 total family law judges and departments. We're down to, I think, 10 or 11 now. And then you have a huge backlog. And so we're talking about people's very real lives, and they get frustrated. And without funding and substantial staffing, both in the clerks and court reporters and interpreters and filing clerks and the judges themselves, there's going to continue to be a backlog, which I know is going to be very frustrating for people.
Thank you. Ms. Stebbins?
So similarly, as my colleagues have said, but even more importantly, we are still dealing with COVID over in court. There is a backlog of hundreds of cases that we're trying to get through, and we have a shortage of staff that left or were laid off during COVID, and that is why we don't have clerks. So we may have courtrooms, we may have judges, but we don't have the staff to staff them, so we can't get through those backlogs. And what what is floated around the justice system is dismissing cases that predate COVID, where the person hasn't committed a new law violation. But we have victims. That's not a solution. We have victims that have waited years for justice. And so we need a better solution than that. But I think those are the issues that are facing us, is this backlog from COVID and this lack of resources to get us through those cases.
Thank you. Next question. What personal traits do you have that you believe would make you a good judge? Ms. Ford, would you start up, please?
I think I have an extraordinary amount of patience, and it is patience that has definitely been learned from working almost exclusively with survivors of trauma for almost 20 years. You have even your own clients get angry at you, get frustrated with you. You're an easy target because of how frustrating the system can be. And learning to be patient and kind and understanding has been a big part of my growth as a person and as an attorney. And I think I can bring that to the court. I have also, I've been a litigant. I was a child in the system. I've been a litigant a number of times, unfortunately. I've seen all aspects. And so to have been the lawyer and the child and litigant, I think I'm positioned to understand better than most people what it's like to be through the system.
Thank you. Ms. Stebbins, what personal traits do you have that you believe would make you a good judge?
So first and foremost, integrity. After doing this 26 years and working with all of the attorneys on the other side of the aisle, your integrity and your reputation is foremost. You have to protect that from the very beginning, because that's what allows you to discuss cases and resolve cases and get justice for people. The other thing is, I would say, courage and confidence to do the right thing when it may not be the most popular thing. I think a judge has to have that courage to be able to do that. And then I would also say compassion. I was a victim of stalking when I was doing the domestic violence cases. Domestic violence defendant stalked me and my family, and that was a terrible thing. And we had to go through the justice system as victims. And he did go off to prison, and so we got justice served. But I certainly understand coming from that aspect as well of having compassion.
Thank you. Mr. Boyarsky, what personal traits do you have that make you believe you may be a good judge?
Honesty, integrity, very strong work ethic. But I think the most important thing is having empathy, the ability to appreciate what other people are going through. I've seen that not just working with victims of crime and working so hard for public safety and accountability, but for the last 13 years, I've been having what I like to call difficult conversations with people in the workplace about cases, about promotions, about hiring, about firing. And it's difficult. It's one thing to say you have empathy, but do people have the skills so that they convey that? Judges make decisions, and the decisions, if they're going to be accepted, they need to be explained well. So I had a number of experiences early in my tenure as the chief assistant DA where I thought, wow, I'm making a lot of decisions and it's difficult. I want to get better at this. So I actually audited a class at Stanford Business School on managing difficult conversations. And that's a subject I now teach.
Thank you. Next question. What impact, if any, do you think AI could have on the judicial system? This is a question from our audience. So, Mr. Boyarsky, why don't you start off on this one?
It's a great question. And I was just discussing this at a dinner the other night with some of my colleagues, and I'm now registered to attend a training on AI in the legal system coming up in Dallas in about 6 weeks. So I'm going to be learning a lot about it. I'm not an expert about AI, but I generally think that the impact it will have on the judiciary will be secondary to the impact it's going to have on lawyers and litigants. The days of lawyers spending a lot of time in the library or online and spending hours crafting legal briefs, those legal briefs are going to be created by AI. What are we going to do as judges to make sure that people are actually getting fairly represented? And heaven forbid if we just stop having judges relying on their own training and experience and just entering something into an AI chatbot to render decisions. So it's an absolutely great question.
Thank you. Ms. Stebbins, what impact do you think AI could have on the judicial system?
Yes, so I've seen in my 26 years in teaching to officers how technology is always 10 steps ahead of the judicial system. We play catch up all the time. We used to have to write search warrants to get into cell phones, and now there's biometrics. And so is that a statement? We have to analyze that under the Fifth Amendment, and the law just isn't caught up. And so AI produces a whole nother set of not only crimes, but also ethical obligations for attorneys and judges, but particularly attorneys who are going to be turning in work product that has been created by someone other than themselves. And it's going to take a lot more diligence on the part of the judicial system in order to make sure that people are honestly and ethically representing their clients and honestly representing the law in court and not something made up by an AI attorney. So it's going to create a lot of challenges, and it's going to take a while for us to catch up, I'm sure.
Thank you. Ms. Ford?
Definitely going to keep us on our toes. We've been seeing, cases being made up by AI and then being submitted by lawyers. And it's going to be on the judges to be able to recognize that and make sure that they're reviewing their cases in depth and really reading those papers. I think it's also important that we don't become reliant on it, because AI can't compensate for a personal touch or empathy or understanding people on a human level. AI is going to be very rote. And so I think we just need to be prepared to find that balance between the two. I think it can help people in a number of ways in terms of access to justice, access to the system. But we need to not become reliant on it and just make sure that we're checking ourselves when we start encountering it more and more.
Thank you. Now we're coming to our last question. This is one that everyone has 90 seconds to respond, and they were given this question in advance. So the question is, what question do you wish we had asked you tonight, and why? Let's start off first with Ms. Stebbins.
So I think it's important to know what current qualifications are. So not just what our background is. So I wish someone asked, what differentiates you from the other candidates, because I think that that's an important question in the sense that I have been in the courtroom 26 years. I have a breadth of experience, but besides that, I continue to do this work in person in the courtroom. So I have firsthand knowledge of what the effect is that COVID has had on our justice system. I'm in the courtroom, seeing the backlog, talking to the victims who have waited years and years for justice. I think that is unique. I also have a unique experience dealing with victims of different types of crimes, so fraud crimes. I've seen, along with that, I also have seen the creativity in sentencing that some of my opponents may not have experienced. So as a judge, that's important because that is one of the aspects of our job. So when I did fraud cases, not every victim is the same. So what's going to make a fraud victim whole might be restitution. And that may be a more important factor in sentencing than jail time. And if we can use the system in order to make that victim whole, that's definitely a better outcome as opposed to just jailing someone.
Thank you. Next, Ms. Ford, what question do you wish we had asked you tonight, and why?
I think one of the things I would have liked to have heard is why the law? What is it about the law that brings you passion, and why are we here? I know we touched on it in our opening statements about wanting to serve the people, but what was it that drove us here? To understand that it's not just a job. I don't think either of my colleagues here would say that it's just a job. I think there's a real passion behind it. And I think we're all bringing that passion with wanting to be on the bench and wanting to further our service to people. But I think understanding where we all came from, again, with that humanizing aspect of the judicial system, humanizing judges, I think that's a critical piece because the law is scary. The system is scary. And if you kind of understand why people got here and how we got here and why we're doing this, I think would help shed some light for a lot of people in making the system seem a little more accessible just for your average Joe. For me, I was a child in a pretty nasty conflict with my parents, and I decided I wanted to help people who couldn't access justice. And to know that I've been able to do that for almost 20 years, and now I want to make sure that I continue that access as a judicial officer. I think it's important people know that.
Thank you. Mr. Borowski, what question do you wish we had asked you tonight, and why?
Well, I wish you would have asked about what the most impactful case was that we ever had, or perhaps asked us about the scourge of sexual assault. Maricela was 7 years old when she was repeatedly raped by her mother's then boyfriend over the space of a summer. I was Maricela's prosecutor after she summoned the courage to tell her mom and then the police what happened to her and how she survived it. It took her 8 years to get that courage that many people are never able to summon. I took Maricela's case to court, and a jury, much like the people watching this debate tonight, were poised to find the defendant guilty. But the judge misinterpreted a law and dismissed the case, asking me to appeal the decision because he believed Maricela. The judge was wrong, and we couldn't appeal the dismissal. So Maricela and I and one of the jurors, Dean Chowning, decided that something had to be done so that this would never happen to another child, so that no child would have the courthouse doors slammed in her face. So I wrote a bill to clarify the law on statute of limitations. And for a year, Maricela and Dean and I went back and forth to Sacramento, and finally Maricela's law was enacted. So I know that with hard work and passion for justice, people can do great things. And I hope that the people watching this debate tonight will vote for me for Superior Court Judge.
Thank you. Thank you to all the candidates. We appreciate your time in coming here. That concludes our forum for tonight. The webinar has been recorded and the league will post the video with no editing from beginning to end in compliance with the Federal Communications Commission rules. The league is not responsible for the content of any recording that is not arranged for or agreed to by the league. If you see fragments or pieces of this event other than in a formal news report, you can rest assured that the League of Women Voters did not authorize it. This forum has been designed to impart information to you, the voter, in accordance with our belief that a democratic government depends upon the informed and active participation of its citizens. We hope that the insights you've gained from this forum will aid you in making your decision. For more voter information, please visit the vote411.org website and other sites that you see listed here. Please vote on or before March 5th and help make our democracy work. Thank you very much now, and I'll turn it over to Aileen Cow.
Thank you. Thank you, candidates, for your participation tonight. We wish you each good luck in your campaign. And thank you also to the audience for joining us tonight. Before we leave, I would like to highlight some of the upcoming programs about artificial intelligence. Questions were being asked today. That is what our league is offering in February. The first one is tomorrow. The subject is what is AI and how it could put election and democracy at risk. It's through Zoom, and it's 7 o'clock tomorrow. The second one is the impact of AI and misinformation on voting, and what can we do about it? It will be held on February 17th. It's a Saturday at 10 o'clock. And the last one is AI and public policy. And it will be held on Wednesday, February 28th, 7 o'clock. All these three sessions are through Zoom. And we welcome you to join us and to register to learn. And so we look forward to have this learning opportunity with all of you. So in closing, please remember that democracy is not a spectator sport, and your vote is your voice. So primary is on March 5th. Thank you and good night.
Thank you. Well, the candidates are all gone. I was going to thank them again.